Chapter 1. Coming home for the holidays. The windshield wipers of my Honda Civic struggled against the heavy snow as I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home in Grand Rapids, Michigan, December 23, 2024, and the weather was as unforgiving as I remembered. The two-story colonial house looked smaller than in my memories, its white paint peeling slightly around the window frames, Christmas lights hanging unevenly from the gutters like a crooked smile. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 28, I should have been excited about coming home for Christmas. Instead, my stomach churned with the same anxiety that had plagued me since booking the flight from Chicago 3 weeks ago. I sat in the car for a moment, watching my breath fog up the windows, debating whether I could still turn around and drive back to my studio apartment on the north side. The front door opened before I could make that decision. My younger brother, Jake, emerged, his tall frame filling the doorway, wearing a Michigan State sweatshirt and a genuine smile that reminded me why I'd made this trip. "Sarah," he called out, jogging through the snow in his house slippers. "Mom's been cooking since yesterday. I think she's trying to feed the entire neighborhood." I stepped out of the car, immediately hit by the sharp Michigan winter air that cut through my Chicago-bought coat like it was tissue paper. Jake pulled me into a bear hug that lifted me off my feet, and for a moment, I felt like the big sister who used to protect him from neighborhood bullies, instead of the woman who'd been avoiding family gatherings for the past 2 years. "How's nursing school treating you?" I asked, though I already knew from our weekly phone calls that he was excelling in his final semester. "Can't complain. How's saving lives in the big city?" "One patient at a time," I replied, though the truth was more complicated. Working in the emergency department at Northwestern Memorial had been both a blessing and a curse. The constant chaos kept my mind occupied, but it also meant I rarely had time to process my own emotional wounds. We grabbed my luggage from the trunk, and Jake filled me in on the family dynamics I'd missed. Dad's been working overtime at the plant to avoid talking about Uncle Tom's divorce. Aunt Linda's bringing her new boyfriend, some guy named Brad who sells insurance and apparently talks about golf constantly. And Mom ... double quotes. He paused, his expression growing serious. "She's been trying, Sarah, really trying." I knew what he meant without him having to elaborate. Margaret Mitchell had been trying for as long as I could remember, but her version of trying usually involved switching from vodka to wine, or limiting herself to drinking only after 5 p.m., or attending AA meetings for 2 weeks before disappearing again. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey when we stepped inside, a mixture of comfort and nostalgia that transported me back to better Christmases when I was young enough to believe that the holidays could fix everything. The living room was decorated with the same ornaments I remembered from childhood, the handmade paper angels Jake and I had crafted in elementary school, the collection of snow globes Mom had accumulated over the years, and the artificial tree that had seen better decades but still held our family's history in its branches. "Sarah, honey," my father's voice boomed from the kitchen. Robert Mitchell emerged, wiping his hands on a dish towel, his hair grayer than I remembered, but his smile as warm as ever. Dad had always been the stabilizing force in our family, the one who packed our lunches when Mom couldn't get out of bed, who attended parent-teacher conferences alone, who taught me how to drive because Mom had been too drunk to sit in the passenger seat. His embrace was gentler than Jake's, but lasted longer, and I felt him take a deep breath, as if reassuring himself that I was really there. "How's my favorite daughter?" he asked, using the same joke he'd told since I was 5. "I'm your only daughter, Dad. That's what makes you my favorite." The kitchen was Margaret's domain, and as I walked in, I found her standing at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. She was dressed in her good sweater, navy blue with small pearls, sewn into a pattern around the neckline, and her hair was styled in a way that suggested she'd made an effort. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, her face lit up with what seemed like genuine happiness. "Sarah, baby, you made it." She set down her wooden spoon and moved toward me with arms outstretched. The hug was awkward, lasting a beat too long, and I could smell the faint traces of alcohol beneath her expensive perfume. It wasn't strong, probably just wine with lunch, but it was there, like a warning signal I'd learned to recognize. "In childhood, the kitchen looks amazing, Mom," I said. And it was true. She'd outdone herself with the preparations. Homemade rolls rising on the counter, green bean casserole assembled and ready for the oven, cranberry sauce that she'd made from scratch despite the fact that Jake and I both preferred the canned version. "I wanted everything to be perfect," she said, her words carrying an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "It's been too long since we've all been together." The truth was, it had been exactly 14 months since I'd last visited, missing Thanksgiving, and last Christmas, because of work schedules that were real but not insurmountable. The real reason I'd stayed away was standing in front of me, stirring gravy and pretending that our last conversation hadn't ended with her screaming that I was ungrateful and selfish for moving to Chicago instead of staying home to help her. "What can I do to help?" I asked, falling into the familiar pattern of trying to be useful, trying to be good enough, trying to earn the approval that had always felt just out of reach. "Just relax, sweetheart. You work so hard in that hospital. This is your time to be taken care of." But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly as she worked. Margaret Mitchell was never more dangerous than when she was trying to be perfect, because perfection was impossible, and failure always called for a drink. The afternoon passed peacefully enough. I helped Dad set up the card table for the kids. Even though Jake and I were well past needing it. We watched the beginning of It's a Wonderful Life on television, and I caught up with the neighbors who stopped by to drop off cookies and exchange pleasantries. Mrs. Henderson from next door remarked on how grown-up I looked, and Mr. Peterson asked about my job with genuine interest, making me remember why I'd loved this neighborhood as a child. By evening, the rest of the family began arriving. Uncle Tom showed up looking defeated, the divorce clearly taking its toll. Aunt Linda arrived with Brad, who was exactly as advertised, a pleasant enough man who somehow managed to work golf into every conversation. My cousin Emma, now 16, and beautiful in that way that made me feel ancient, hugged me tight and whispered that she was thinking about studying nursing to. As we all gathered in the living room before dinner, I watched Mom move through the group with a wine glass that never seemed too empty, refilling it frequently from the bottle she kept on the kitchen counter. She was animated, laughing a little too loudly at Brad's golf stories, complimenting Linda's new haircut with enthusiasm that felt forced. Dad caught my eye from across the room, his expression reflecting the same concern I felt. We'd developed this silent communication system over the years, a way of monitoring Mom's condition without drawing attention to it. Tonight, he seemed to be saying, we needed to be careful. Dinner's ready, Mom announced at exactly 6 o'clock, and we all filed into the dining room where she'd set the table with her best china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier like tiny prisms. As we took our seats, I found myself directly across from Mom, with Jake on my left and Emma on my right. The table looked beautiful, the turkey golden and perfect, side dishes arranged artfully, candles flickering in their holders. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that maybe this Christmas would be different, that maybe the effort she'd put into the meal reflected a genuine change. Dad said, "Grace," thanking God for bringing the family together and asking for blessings on the year ahead. When he finished, we all said amen, and Mom stood up to carve the turkey, the carving knife gleaming in her hand like a promise of things to come. Chapter 2. The breaking point. The first hour of dinner passed smoothly, filled with the comfortable chaos of family conversation. Uncle Tom shared stories about his new apartment, carefully avoiding any mention of his ex-wife. Brad regaled us with tales from the golf course that were more entertaining than I'd expected. Emma talked about her plans for college, her eyes bright with possibility. Jake described his clinical rotations at the hospital, and I felt proud watching him discuss his patients with the same compassion that had drawn me to nursing. Mom played the perfect hostess, ensuring everyone's plates were full, their glasses topped off, their dietary restrictions accommodated. She'd remembered that Linda was avoiding carbs, that Emma was going through a vegetarian phase, that Uncle Tom couldn't handle too much salt since his heart attack. But with each trip to the kitchen, I noticed her wine glass getting refilled, and her laughter becoming more forced. "Sarah, tell us about your job," Aunt Linda said as she picked at her salad. "Jake says you're working in the emergency room. That must be so stressful." I launched into my usual explanation about the satisfaction of emergency medicine, the variety of cases, the feeling of making a real difference in people's lives during their worst moments. What I didn't mention was how the constant exposure to trauma had left me hypervigilant, how I sometimes woke up in the middle of the night thinking I heard monitors beeping, how I'd started seeing a therapist because I couldn't stop replaying every patient I'd lost. "She's being modest," Jake interjected. "She won an award last month for her work during that multi-car accident on the highway, saved 3 lives in one shift." "That's wonderful, dear," Mom said, but there was something sharp in her voice. "I'm sure Chicago appreciates having you more than we do." The comment hung in the air like smoke, and I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied our conversations when she'd been drinking. Dad quickly jumped in with a question about the weather forecast, and the moment passed, but the damage was done. The seed of conflict had been planted. As we moved through the main course, Mom's comments became increasingly pointed. When I mentioned my small apartment, she noted how expensive rent must be and how much money I was wasting that could have been saved if I'd stayed home. When I talked about my coworkers, she made passive-aggressive remarks about how I must not have time for family anymore with all my new friends. "Remember when Sarah used to help me in the kitchen every Christmas?" Mom said, addressing the table but looking directly at me. "Now she's too busy saving strangers to spend time with her own mother." "Mom," Jake said quietly, "Sarah helps at the hospital. She saves people's lives. And what do you think I do?" she snapped, her voice rising slightly. "Do you think raising you two was easy? Do you think it was easy being here alone while she runs off to the big city to play hero?" The table fell silent, except for the soft clink of forks against plates. Emma stared down at her food, clearly uncomfortable. Uncle Tom cleared his throat and mumbled something about the turkey being delicious. Brad, bless him, seemed completely oblivious to the tension and asked Dad about the Lions' chances this season. I took a deep breath, trying to channel the de-escalation techniques I'd learned in the emergency room. Mom, I'm grateful for everything you did raising us. That's exactly why I wanted to help people the way you helped us. It was the wrong thing to say. Her face flushed red, and she set down her wine glass with enough force to make the crystal ring. Help people, she said, her voice getting louder. Help people the way I helped you. You want to know how I helped you, Sarai? I gave up everything for you. My career, my dreams, my entire life. I was 20 years old when I got pregnant with you. Did you know that? 20 years old with my whole life ahead of me. Mom, please, Dad said, his voice carrying a warning. No, Robert, she needs to hear this. They both need to hear this. She gestured wildly with her hand, nearly knocking over the cranberry sauce. I had a scholarship to Michigan State. I was going to be a teacher, but then you came along, and suddenly I'm stuck in this house, changing diapers and making bottles while all my friends went off to college. My throat felt like it was closing. I'd heard versions of this story before, usually when she was drunk and angry, but never in front of the entire family. Jake reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. I tried to make the best of it, she continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. I tried to be a good mother. But you were such a difficult baby, always crying, always needing something. And then when you finally grew up, what did you do? You left. You couldn't wait to get away from me. Margaret, that's enough, Dad said, firmly, but she was beyond stopping now. You know what the worst part is? She said, standing up and swaying slightly. Everyone always talks about what a wonderful daughter you are, how successful you've become, how proud I must be. But you know what I think when they say that? The room was dead silent. Even Brad had stopped talking about golf. I think about how you were the worst mistake of my life, she said, her words falling like stones into still water. If I hadn't gotten pregnant with you, I could have been somebody. I could have had a real life instead of being trapped in this house, watching you become everything I should have been. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the color drain from my face, felt my hands start to shake. Around the table, everyone sat frozen, as if moving might shatter whatever was left of our family dinner. But Margaret wasn't finished. In a move that seemed to mock the gravity of what she'd just said, she picked up the carving knife and began slicing more turkey, her movements mechanical and precise. Would anyone like more meat? She asked in a bright artificial voice, as if she hadn't just told her daughter that her existence had ruined her life. The surreal nature of the moment, the cheerful offer of turkey following such devastating words made everything feel like a nightmare. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to say she didn't mean it, to show some sign that she understood what she'd just done. Instead, she placed a slice of turkey on my plate with shaking hands. There you go, sweetheart, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Eat up. I pushed back from the table so abruptly that my chair nearly fell over. Excuse me, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I walked quickly toward the front door, grabbing my coat from the closet. Sarah, wait, Jake called after me, but I was already outside, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I stood in the driveway, surrounded by the gentle fall of snow, trying to process what had just happened. The Christmas lights on the neighbors' houses blurred through my tears, and I could hear the muffled sounds of urgent conversation coming from inside the house. 20-8 years old, and I was still that little girl desperate for my mother's approval, still believing that if I could just be good enough, smart enough, successful enough, she would love me the way I needed her to. But standing there in the snow, I finally understood that nothing I did would ever be enough. Because the problem wasn't with me. It never had been. The front door opened, and Dad appeared, his face etched with grief and anger. Sarah, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She didn't mean it. She's drunk and hurt, and yes, she did, I said quietly. She meant every word, and for the first time in my life, I knew it was true. Chapter 3, Aftermath and Revelations. I spent that night at Jake's apartment near the university, sleeping on his couch while he made me tea and tried to convince me that Mom would be sorry in the morning. But when morning came, there was no phone call, no text message, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had happened. Christmas morning arrived, gray and quiet. I woke up on Jake's couch to the sound of my phone buzzing with messages from Dad, asking if we were coming over to open presents. The thought of sitting in that living room, pretending everything was normal, made my stomach turn. I can't do it, I told Jake over coffee. I can't sit there and act like nothing happened. What if we just go for an hour? He suggested. For Dad? He's caught in the middle of all this. I understood Jake's loyalty to our father, who had spent his life trying to keep our family intact. But I also knew that going back would send the message that Mom's behavior was acceptable as long as she apologized later. I need to see her first, I said, alone. Jake looked worried. Are you sure that's a good idea? No, but I need to do it anyway. I drove to the house by myself, my hands shaking as I pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mom moving around, probably making her famous Christmas morning cinnamon rolls. For a moment, she looked like any other mother preparing a holiday breakfast for her family. I let myself in the back door, the way I had thousands of times as a child. Mom looked up from the stove, her face immediately brightening with hope. Sarah, I was hoping you'd come. I made your favorite. We need to talk, I said, cutting her off. Her face fell, and I could see fear creep into her eyes. She turned off the burner and faced me, wrapping her arms around herself defensively. About what happened at dinner, she began. I was upset and had too much wine. You know how I get when stop, I said firmly. Don't minimize it. Don't blame the alcohol. Don't make excuses. She stared at me, probably unused to hearing such strength in my voice. I took a deep breath and continued. You told me I was the worst mistake of your life, in front of our entire family, while serving turkey. Do you remember that? She nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. Good, because I need you to understand what that did to me. I need you to understand that I've spent my entire life trying to earn your love, trying to be good enough, trying to prove that I was worth keeping. And in one sentence, you told me that nothing I ever do will matter because my very existence ruined your life. I didn't mean yes, you did, I said, surprising myself with my calmness. You've meant it for a long time, maybe not consciously, but deep down, you've resented me for changing your life. And I'm done pretending that's not true. Mom collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs, her face crumpling. Sarah, please, I love you so much. You're my daughter, my firstborn. I would die for you. I know you love me, I said, sitting across from her, but you also resent me. And your love comes with so much pain attached that I don't know how to receive it anymore. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of truth settling between us. Finally, Mom spoke. I was so young, she whispered, and I was scared all the time. I didn't know what I was doing, and every time you cried or got sick or needed something, I felt like I was failing. And then the drinking started, and everything got so much worse. I know about the AA meetings, I said gently. Dad told me you've been trying to get sober. She looked up sharply. I've been sober for 3 months. Well, I was until she gestured vaguely toward the dining room where our disastrous dinner had taken place. What made you start going to meetings? Last Christmas, when you didn't come home, I realized that if I kept drinking, I was going to lose you and Jake forever, and the thought of that was worse than the thought of being sober. But you're not sober now, I pointed out. No, she admitted. I'm not. I bought wine for cooking, and I told myself I could handle it. Just a glass while I cooked, then another while I cleaned, then ... She shrugged helplessly. Mom, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep coming home hoping things will be different and then getting destroyed when they're not. It's killing me. She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love you, but I can't have a relationship with you while you're drinking, and I can't take responsibility for your sobriety anymore. That has to be your choice, your commitment, your work. And if I get sober, really sober this time. I thought about this question, which I'd been wrestling with since Dad showed me those photos. If you get sober and stay sober, if you do the work to understand how your drinking affected our family, if you're willing to make real amends that don't involve me taking care of your feelings about what you did, then maybe we can rebuild something. But it would be a new relationship, not the old one. I don't understand. I mean, I'm done trying to be the daughter who makes you feel better about your choices. I'm done apologizing for having a life outside this house. I'm done being responsible for your happiness. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be between two adults who respect each other's boundaries. Mom was crying now, but she nodded. What do you need from me? I need you to go back to AA, not for me, but for yourself. I need you to stay sober for at least a year before we try to rebuild our relationship. And I need you to understand that even if you do all of that, I might not be able to forgive what you said to me. That's my right, and it's not your responsibility to fix it. She was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd said. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that seemed clearer than they had in years. You're right, she said simply, about all of it. I have been resentful, and I have been unfair to you, and I have been using alcohol to avoid dealing with my own problems. It was the first time I'd ever heard her take full responsibility without making excuses. I don't know if I can get sober, she continued. I've tried so many times and failed, but I know I have to try again, because losing you would be worse than anything else I can imagine. Then try, I said, but try for yourself, not for me. I stood up to leave, feeling emotionally drained, but also strangely light. At the door, I turned back. Mom, for what it's worth, I hope you succeed. Not because I need you to, but because you deserve to be happy. And you can't be happy living the way you've been living. She smiled through her tears. You know, when you were little, you used to say you wanted to grow up to help people feel better. I guess you're doing that now. I learned it from watching Dad, I said. He spent his whole life trying to help you feel better. Yes, she said quietly. As I left the house feeling like I'd finally said everything I needed to say. Jake was waiting in his apartment with worried eyes and fresh coffee. How did it go? He asked. Hard, but good, I think. I told her I can't have a relationship with her while she's drinking. Jake looked relieved. I've been thinking the same thing, but I didn't know how to say it. We can't save her, Jake. We can love her, but we can't save her. I know, he said. It just feels like giving up. It's not giving up. It's letting go of something that was never our responsibility in the first place. That afternoon, we went to Dad's house to exchange presents and eat leftover turkey. Mom had gone to an AA meeting, her first step back toward sobriety. Dad looked older but somehow relieved, as if a weight he'd been carrying for decades had finally been shared. "I'm proud of you," he told me as we sat by the Christmas tree, "for speaking your truth. I should have done that years ago." "It's not too late for you either, Dad," he smiled sadly. "Maybe not. We'll see." 3 days later, I flew back to Chicago, but this time the departure felt different. Instead of running away from my family, I was walking toward my own life. I'd finally stopped trying to fix my mother, stopped taking responsibility for her emotions, stopped believing that I could love her enough to heal her. 6 months later, Mom called to tell me she'd been sober for 90 days and had a sponsor who was helping her work through the steps. She didn't ask me to come home or pressure me to forgive her. She just wanted me to know that she was trying. "I'm glad," I told her, and I meant it. A year later, she called on my birthday. Not to make amends or ask for forgiveness, but simply to tell me she was proud of the woman I'd become. It was the first time in my life I could remember her saying that without any conditions attached. "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much it meant to hear. "I'm learning that loving you means supporting your choices, even when they're hard for me to accept," she said. "Even when those choices don't include me." "She's in denial mode," Jake explained as he made breakfast. "You know how she gets after ... episodes. She pretend it never happened and expect everyone else to do the same." I'd seen this pattern before, but never after something so devastating. Usually her drunk confessions were about smaller grievances, how I never called enough, how I thought I was better than my family, how ungrateful I was, but telling me I was the worst mistake of her life crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Please come back. We need to talk as a family." Jake drove me over that afternoon, Christmas Eve. The house felt different somehow, smaller and sadder. The beautiful Christmas decorations from the night before now seemed like props in a play that had gone horribly wrong. I found Dad in his workshop in the basement, tinkering with an old radio the way he always did when he was stressed. His hands were steady as he worked, but his shoulders were slumped with exhaustion. "She's upstairs sleeping it off," he said, without looking up. "Been there since you left last night." "Dad, why did you never leave her?" The question had been building inside me for years, but I'd never had the courage to ask it. He set down his screwdriver and looked at me with eyes that held decades of pain. "Because I loved her. Because I believed she could get better. Because leaving would have meant leaving you and Jake with her, and I couldn't do that. But we're adults now. Jake's almost done with school. You could what? Start over at 55? Admit that the last 30 years of my life were a mistake?" He shook his head. "Besides, Sarah, your mother is sick. She's not evil. She's sick." I wanted to argue with him, to tell him that being sick didn't give her the right to destroy her children's self-worth, but I could see the defeat in his eyes. This was a man who had spent his entire adult life trying to hold a family together, and he was tired. "What she said to you was unforgivable," he continued. "But I need you to understand something about your mother that you've never known." He walked over to an old filing cabinet and pulled out a photo album I'd never seen before. Inside were pictures of my parents when they were young, really young. Mom looked like a different person, her face bright and unguarded, her smile genuine. "This was taken the day she found out she was pregnant with you," he said, pointing to a picture of them at some kind of outdoor festival. "Look at her face." In the photo, Mom was glowing, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, looking up at Dad with pure joy. It was hard to reconcile this radiant young woman with the bitter person who had told me I was a mistake. "She was scared," Dad continued, "but she was also excited. She used to talk to you when you were in her belly, telling you about all the things she wanted to teach you. She had this whole plan about how she was going to be different from her own mother, how she was going to give you everything she never had." He turned the page to show more photos. Mom reading pregnancy books, painting my nursery, holding me as a newborn with a look of fierce protectiveness. "So what happened?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Postpartum depression, at first, then your grandmother died when you were 6 months old, and she started drinking to cope with the grief. By the time she realized she had a problem, it had become bigger than she was." The photos told the story he couldn't put into words. As they progressed through my childhood, I could see the light gradually leaving Mom's eyes, her smiles becoming more forced, her grip on Dad and me becoming more desperate. "I'm not excusing what she said to you," Dad said firmly. "There is no excuse for that. But I need you to understand that when she looks at you, she doesn't just see her daughter. She sees the life she wanted to give you, the mother she wanted to be, and her own failure to be that person." "That's not my fault," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "No, baby girl, it's not. It's not your fault at all." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of 30 years of family history settling around us like dust. Finally, Dad closed the photo album and looked at me directly. "I have something else to tell you," he said. "Your mother has been going 2 AA meetings for the past 3 months. Real ones, not the fake ones, where she goes twice and quits. She's been working the program, has a sponsor, the whole thing." This surprised me. In all my years of watching her struggle with alcohol, I had never seen her commit to sobriety for more than a few weeks. "What changed?" I asked. "You did?" When you didn't come home last Christmas, she finally realized what she was losing. She's been trying to get sober so she could make amends to you and Jake. The irony was devastating. She'd been getting sober to repair our relationship, and then she'd destroyed it while drunk. She relapsed last week, Dad continued. The stress of having everyone here, wanting everything to be perfect, it was too much. She bought a bottle of wine for cooking and convinced herself she could handle it. I felt a familiar stab of guilt, the one that had followed me my entire life. If I had just been easier to love, if I had just visited more often, if I had just been a better daughter. Stop, Dad said, reading my expression. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. Her addiction is not your responsibility, and it never has been then? Whose responsibility is it? I asked. Hers, he said simply, and mine, for enabling her for so long. That evening, Jake and I sat in his living room, processing everything Dad had told us. My brother had always been the family peacemaker, the one who tried to see the best in everyone, but even he was struggling with what had happened. I keep thinking about all the times she was a good mom, he said. Like when you broke your arm in 5th grade and she slept in the hospital chair for 3 nights? Or when I was getting bullied and she went to the school and raised hell until they stopped it? She was a good mom sometimes, I agreed. But being a good mom sometimes doesn't erase being a terrible mom. Other times, Jake nodded slowly. I've been thinking about going to Al-Anon meetings. For families of alcoholics, maybe we both need to learn how to love her without letting her destroy us. The idea terrified me. Learning to love Mom safely felt like admitting that she would never change, that this was who she was, and I would have to find a way to live with that. But maybe that was exactly what I needed to admit. As I lay on Jake's couch that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn my mother's love. All the achievements and accolades that were supposed to prove I was worth keeping. I thought about the emergency room where I threw myself into saving other people's lives because I couldn't save my own family. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it might feel like to stop trying to fix her, to stop taking responsibility for her happiness, to stop believing that I could love her enough to make her love herself. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. Chapter 4. Finding a Path Forward. It wasn't the relationship I'd dreamed of having with my mother, but it was honest. And for the first time in my life, honest felt like enough. I still work in the emergency room, saving lives and helping people through their worst moments. But now I understand that some people can only be saved by themselves, and that's not a failure of love. It's just the way healing works. Sometimes. The most loving thing you can do is let someone go, even if that someone is your mother. Even if it happens at Christmas dinner, right after she passes the turkey.